Welcome to the Singer's Guide podcast with me, Tessa. This is the show for ambitious singers who want more than just scales and song practice. We'll talk about the things regular singing lessons don't always have time to cover. Because being a singer is about more than just your voice. It's about confidence, preparation, and all the little skills that make performing effortless. I'm excited to be your guide and your fellow traveller as we explore them all. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Singer's Guide podcast. I'm your host Tessa, and today I thought we would talk about how to choose the right key for your songs. There are so many things to consider when we're talking about this, but firstly, let's talk about why we might want to change the key of the song and when that is okay to do and when it's not okay to do. Changing the key of the song involves taking every element of that music, including the backing, the chords, and shifting it either higher or lower in its entirety. And we might want to do that if the song that we've picked was sung by somebody originally who was a different voice type to us, so maybe they were a baritone or a tenor, but we are a more treble voice, vice versa. There are certain genres where it's less accepted to change keys, so for the purpose of this, I want you to know we are not talking about Western classical music. My knowledge of that area is not as big as my knowledge of contemporary music, but it is my understanding that in that style of music, you tend to do what the composer intended, so you would leave the song in the key that it was originally written in. The other genre that we probably wouldn't change the key of unless it was in the context of a concert and not a show is musical theatre. And the reason for that is again because the composer will have written it with specific things in mind. It sits within the context of the wider show. So changing the key of one song might have implications. On top of that, there's going to be musicians hopefully playing within the pit band, and to change the key of a song would involve rewriting, rescoring all of those parts for the instruments too. So that's why in musical theatre, the rule tends to be stick in the original key. Unless, as I say, you're taking it as a song to sing in a concert, then the things that we're about to talk about will apply. So today's episode is focusing on contemporary styles of music, things like popular music, R&B, jazz, those kinds of styles where it's much more acceptable to change the key to fit with your voice. So you've picked a song and we want to check that it's in the best key for you. The first thing that we want to do is see the general range. Can we hit all the high notes and all the low notes? And do they feel relatively comfortable? Now, if it's a case that the song has a huge range and whichever way you move it, the higher notes are going to become too high or the low notes are going to be too low, we're probably going to keep it where it is and maybe adapt the melody lines. So you sing notes that are slightly less low or notes that are slightly less high, and we sort of improvise within that. Again, we can do that within these contemporary and jazz styles. Less easy to do that in the other genres I've mentioned. That, however, would not be considered changing the key because the overall song, the chords of the song, the key of the song has not changed. So if you don't feel like you can shift the key because it will make the other end of your voice struggle, then we leave it where it is and come up with different solutions instead. However, if it's a case that the lowest notes are too low, but you've got a lot of space at the top, we can definitely consider moving the key up. And conversely, if it's too high, but we've got lots of space at the low end, we can move it down. The next thing I want us to think about is the big, intense moment of the song. It's very common for songs to have a moment, an emotional peak, a money note if you want. And we want to make sure that that note or that moment in the song sits in the best part of your voice to be able to get the intensity and the emotion that we want out. And what that might mean is moving the song higher and putting it into a higher register that you can get strength in rather than always moving the song lower. So I want you to be aware of that. Think about the big note, and if you're struggling with it, maybe Takes a bit of bravery, but maybe try it a little bit higher in your practice sessions. And I want to go further with talking about this intention and emotion because I think it is the key. Sorry, that was a genuine no pun intended moment. Sometimes we can sing a song, say I can sing a song by a male artist, hit all the notes, but when it sounds really intense in their slightly higher mixy belt place, that's not in a mixed belt for me. I can still hit the notes, but it doesn't have that same sense of urgency or intenseness. Is that a word? Intensity that the original singer has. What I want to do is put the key into a place where I can capture the same intensity and emotion in my voice as they do in theirs. So just because I can sing the notes doesn't mean it's the right key. We want to really match the emotion and the storytelling. That is a big one for me. I think it's incredibly important. So once we've thought about those two things, the general range and then the moments of emotional intensity and making sure that they feel aligned with what our voice can do, the last thing that I want us to consider is whether we are using backing tracks or live musicians. Because this does make a difference. As a vocalist, it maybe doesn't matter so much whether I'm in the key of B or B flat or C, which are all a half step away from each other. For me, with a fluid voice, it doesn't matter, really. But for certain instrumentalists, they have to get their fingers around certain keys, and some keys are going to be easier than others. Yes, great musicians can play in all keys, but there are keys that are going to be just nicer, more enjoyable to play in. So for example, B has 5 sharps on a piano, which is quite tricky to get your fingers around in comparison to something like B flat, which only has 2 flats, or C, which doesn't have any sharps or flats. So we want to think about that if we are going to eventually be taking this to musicians to play. A tiny change for us might actually make a big difference to them. But let's first talk about backing tracks. So we don't have the same issue with backing tracks. We can take a backing track, we can knock it up by 1 half step or down, and it's not going to make a difference to those instrumentalists on the track because it's a pre-record. And if you are looking for tools to help you to choose the right key, there are lots of different tools that we can use to transpose, so that's move the key up or down, on the internet. And I actually have a guide for that you can find in the show notes. If you pop your email in, then I will send you an email straight away with some of the tools that I use that I think are really, really helpful and really simple to use. So if you're using backing tracks, I highly recommend grabbing that. And also with that comes an extra little guide of how to use a backing track in 3 different ways before you even perform your song. So as I said, grab that in the show notes if you'd like it. But yes, whilst you're working with backing tracks, have a little play. Use those tools or whatever tools you use to try things out. The best thing to do is just play around with the keys, pop it up a little bit, see how it feels. Pop it down a little bit, see how it feels. We want it to feel comfortable, but also sound like we want it to. And as I said, that means capturing the emotional intensity of the song, making sure that the vocal qualities that you're able to employ work well for the song and are what you want. And if we're talking about working with live musicians, what we need to be doing is, again, doing that exploring on our own with backing tracks if you want to find where's the best place for you to be singing it. And then we want to find out the actual key, because the key, and that comes in a letter like B or B minor, that's the thing that's going to help us know whether we've put it in a friendly key or a less friendly key for our musicians. And it also depends on the instrument that they're playing. So there is a little bit more knowledge to have there. But if you already have the musicians that you're playing with, then you can just ask them. You can say to your guitarist friend, hey, how do you feel playing in this key? Guitarists have a capo, so it might be a little bit easier for them to transpose. Maybe talk to your piano player, or if you've got trumpet, ask them, how would you feel about putting this in G? And they'll probably say, no, thank you. Could you put it in F? Or maybe that's just my friend who's a trumpet player. So anyway, if you are working, as I said, with live musicians, what you want to do is have your keys and then be prepared to maybe have a tiny discussion about it. Stand your ground. If you know that you cannot put it any lower or any higher, then that is your key. But if there's some wiggle room and you weren't quite sure, then that's a discussion. The other thing to say about this, because I do love to talk about practice, is you can have a couple of keys. You can have your aspirational key and your working key. So the working key would be, if I'm going to go and perform tomorrow, I feel comfortable with this. I really do want it to be up a couple of steps, but I'm working on my mixed belt right now and it's not quite there. So I don't feel comfortable performing it, but for practice, that's my aim. I like that. I think it's a really good idea to have things that you're practicing that are aspirational, that do work you and push you towards a goal. So consider that as well. Have a working key and then an aspirational key, and that gives you something to practice. So there you go. There's some tips and tricks on how to choose the right key for your song. As I said, there's some resources in the show notes as well, which might help you to have a little play and pick the right key for you. And before I sign off, after every episode in this first season of the Singer's Guide podcast, I am going to invite you to tell me, what do you wish that you'd learned sooner as a singer? Or what have you not learned yet that you really wish someone would teach you? I'm going to take your answers and collate them into the final episode of this season, and maybe even some of them will inspire a whole podcast episode of their own. So please do pop that in a comment or send me a message on social media. I'm at Tessa Smith Music. I would love to hear that. And whilst you're at it, you can also write a review if you'd like, or send these episodes to singer friends who you think they would be beneficial for. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Happy singing! Thanks for tuning in to the Singer's Guide podcast. You'll find all the resources and links from this episode in the show notes. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share it with a fellow singer who'd love it too. And don't forget to connect with me on socials at Tessa Smith Music. Keep singing, keep practicing, and I'll see you next time. Bye!